Hello, Ross Hogg. You directed The Last Train. You live in Scotland.
Yeah.
So your film is in our international competition. Congrats.
Thank you for playing it. Cheers.
My first question is really, really basic. Where does the film come from? You had a bad experience on a train?
Yeah, well, not so much a bad experience, but just I think it's it's born out of traveling on the last train home from an event or something in the middle of town, and just noticing what happens around you. I think it happens quite a lot in Scotland. I don't know. It might be relatable for other places in the world, but in Scotland, I think, especially weekends, people tend to go a bit hard at partying or drinking, and then they end up on the last train home, and they're a bit worse for wear. So this was one of those occasions where I found myself in that position and not really wanting to be there, and just thought it was quite a good opportunity to kind of watch and see what happened. So the film was based on that experience.
Yeah. I will read the first, the beginning of your synopsis. Observational animation exploring the behaviors and interactions of a diverse cross-section of tired, drunk, disgruntled, joyous, and riotous strangers. Your first intention was not really to tell a story, but to propose an experience. The film for me is about editing, its pacing, its construction. So for us, and the film is short, 2 minutes 30. Yeah. So you intended to have us in the train with you for this very intense experience. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. I think it's intended mainly just to be like a snapshot. So that's why it's short. I kind of wanted to drop people in and just make them experience it. So that's why we, myself and Sean, who worked on the film, we drew everything from point of view. So to just try and give that kind of viewer experience of the audience being on that train, and to try and make it feel quite claustrophobic and quite, just quite busy and intense. Try and hype up as much of the, or exaggerate as much of the interactions as much as we could. But there's not. I'm just going to say there's not a huge amount of exaggerating going on. A lot of these things that actually happen. So
I know.
But yeah.
So I suppose that you had to have a very precise storyboard before doing the film. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, the way we worked, because I worked with Sean, Sean Mulvaney. He's a really good illustrator who I've admired his work for years since we studied together. And I've wanted to make an animation with him for a few years, but it's never really panned out. And this opportunity came up where we could make this film together. And so the kind of workflow was I would kind of draw quick thumbnails and give him an idea of what sort of kind of perspective or what sort of composition I was thinking about. And then he would work them up into quite refined illustrations. And he does a lot of work for print. So a lot of the ways that he was working was in separations and thinking about how each frame could almost be treated like a finished print. So that was quite a different way of approaching a film for me. And it was something that he'd never done before. So it was quite structured and it was quite planned. But it was a kind of more sort of illustrator's approach to making a film rather than a kind of a directed animating kind of normal process that I would maybe use, which was quite enjoyable. And I suppose the film serves as a kind of test to see if something like that could be done over a longer form. But yeah.
Yeah, your previous film, 4-3, which was in our international competition 2 years ago, is entirely abstract.
Yeah.
The previous film, Life Cycles, is figurative. But then I really feel that you have a very coherent filmography. Even if you did one abstract film, one figurative film, and my perception is that your approach to animation is conceptual. Do you agree?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think when I look back, because I've done quite a few films now, and I think when I look back at them, they're all aesthetically quite different.
Yeah, and they're short.
Yeah. But I think there is a kind of something in them that links them. Maybe it's just the approach but I do think that, I mean, I never studied animation. I went to art school and studied illustration. So every time I make a film, it's almost like a learning experience for me, because I don't really know what I'm doing. And I think that's something that I quite like to try and do with the work that I make, because it keeps it fun and playful for me. And I suppose, I think a lot of the time with the films that I've made and films that I'm thinking about making in the future and currently working on, they are like the process driven. So we'll come up with an idea and a process that links to that idea, and then see how that plays out, and almost let the process sort of make some decisions for me as well. So it's not just me making visuals that I want to make. It's almost like the process that I've chosen to work with dictates how that kind of comes to life. And sometimes that, like 4:3, sometimes the process takes over and totally forms what the kind of how the film will flow. So that kind of happened a little bit with The Last Train, although it's slightly more narrative than other things that I've done. But for instance, Life Cycles, the process totally took over there, and that became a film with lots of little snapshots that were quite highly rendered and because it was all about distracting myself. So the film had to be labor intensive and really involved. But I think that's something I'm working on just now as well with a new film. Is it's gonna be a diary film. So everything's drawn and painted in diaries. So it's limited by the physical kind of constraints of the objects that I'm painting in. So I quite like having rules, because otherwise I get distracted and I get sort of excited by too many different things, too many movable parts, and sometimes it loses something. So I quite like to have a rule that I have to try and be playful within. I don't know if I've answered. I just spoke a lot.
Are you a visual artist, also a painter or an illustrator? Are you?
I don't work really in those sort of ways, but that's what I studied. So I went to art school and studied illustration. So I suppose that's the one thing that I'm trained to do, but I don't. That's not really where I sort of make a living, or I found myself once I graduated 6-7 years ago now. Once I graduated, I found myself making films and moving image, and then sort of just stumbled into making animation and film. So I think now I would probably describe myself as an animation filmmaker, but I came from a sort of illustration artistic background, I suppose.
Okay. My next question, maybe it will surprise you. So you studied at the Glasgow School of Art, and you also teach there occasionally.
Yeah.
You know that we have in Canada a famous animator who was born in Scotland, who studied at the Glasgow School of Art, Norman McLaren. And when I was, when you were telling me about your vision of what is filmmaking and animation, I had the impression that it's more or less the way that McLaren thought. So what kind of teaching do you have? I don't think that there's an animation department at the Glasgow School of Art, but it's open to media arts, I suppose. So what kind of approach does the Glasgow School of Art has in filmmaking?
That's a good question. I don't really know if they've got one, because they don't have a course. So yeah, you're right to bring up Norman McLaren. That is one of the one of the main reasons that I started making films. I saw some of his work when I was in second year, I think, and I was totally blown away by it. Didn't realize that you could make that kind of work. So that's definitely had a massive influence on the type of work and how I approach moving image. But yeah, in terms of how the art school teach it, they don't really teach it. So I've been brought in now and again to run workshops and kind of deliver film briefs. So it's kind of up to, when I'm doing that, it's sort of up to me how I do it. Yeah, I think it's the similar principles as the way that I learned and taught myself. Is as long as the idea sort of justifies being brought into film or being brought into moving image, then it's all about finding the right way to do that, I think. And I think in terms of animation, or when I'm working with students and they want to realize their work in animation, I think it's always, I always try, like, it's just a tool. I think in my head, animation is just a tool to communicate. So if your idea can be more coherently and more powerfully communicated by making a series of posters, then go and do that, because that's, at the end of the day, you're just trying to get an idea across to someone. But if the best way of doing it is using moving image, and if that's going to be the most, emotive and moving way of connecting with an audience, then that's the way you've got to do it. And then that opens a whole new set of challenges, as like, what materials do you use and how do you best resolve those kind of visual elements. But I think, yeah, in terms of the way that I approach sort of any teaching or anything at the art school in Glasgow, it's all kind of, I try to let it be as much about the individual and what best suits their needs, so that the work that they make, so that it can have a real identity and a voice, because I think that's important, especially when you're making short form work. I think having some kind of identity to how you communicate and how you connect with an audience is quite important.
Okay. Well, Ross, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We really hope that we'll be able to welcome you in Montreal in the near future.
I'd love that. That'd be great.
Please stay safe, and we'll see you soon, and I wish you a lot of success. Thank you.
You too. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Bye, Ross.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.